We've also just been joined by Sebastien Wielemans, who is on his way up, also a film director who we will have the chance to hear more from later today. So I'll give the full bio introduction later today. We're also looking forward to at least a partial screening of one of his recent films. So I'm glad that there is some culture represented on the Culture Diplomacy panel as well. The ambassador of Kosovo, I'm not sure if he has arrived yet. His Excellency Ambassador Dugolli, so we may have him join us in a few moments. Dr. Pieter Lagrou, we've already had the chance to get to know with his excellent keynote this morning, professor based here in Belgium. We have not had a chance to meet, actually, Mr. Indrek Tarand, who is just approaching the panel, a member of the European Parliament. So I'm very happy to have the chance that you can join us. Please take your seat maybe here towards the center. Yeah, come closer to the center. We should, for the camera. If you're leftist, okay, well, we'll put that aside for now. But also a member of the European Parliament. I will give a full introduction to him for his lecture later this afternoon. We've also been joined by Annemie Neyts-Uyttebroeck. Is she here? I think she is, yes. Okay, she's on her way up. Ms. Uyttebroeck, if you could please join us on the panel as well, that would be wonderful. She is also a member of the European Parliament, and I will introduce her in more depth before her lecture at a later point. And then I've also been joined by a friend of mine from Berlin, actually. I'm very happy he joined us somewhat spontaneously, actually. He happens to be in Berlin this week, so he didn't come all the way to Germany just for us, but for other meetings here. Dr. Rabban Daniel Foreman. He's currently working at the Technical University of Berlin. He's speaker of the Research and Development Cluster for Procedure, focusing on procedural governance. So I look forward also to his perspectives. And Ms. Uyttebroeck, maybe could you join maybe next to me, if possible? Excellent. Okay. I'm very much looking forward. And then Mr. Severin, wherever you would like. Yeah. He's on the phone. So yes, so that is actually our panel. So as you can see, relatively international, relatively interdisciplinary. And I'd like to do this as interactive as possible. We're skipping your coffee break this morning in the name of time. And also the questions and answers always seem to be cut too short. So I thought, let's try to make this quite interactive. I will ask only one question of the panelists. I would ask them to give a brief introductory remark based on their perspectives. Let's say 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something brief. And we can use that as a springboard to then hopefully inspire and also provoke your own questions and your own comments, which can then fuel the second part of the panel discussion. So I'd like to begin by actually making reference a little bit to the fact, we're talking here about the historical foundations of the European Union, cultural diplomacy. And very often when we think of the European Union, we think about coal, we think about steel, we think about economics, we think about the Europe. And it's always been this age-old question, what relevance really does culture have? Does culture have any relevance? Is it holding this union together? Especially now, I think European Union is being really put to the test. What is it in the end that is going to hold this group together, if anything? And I wanted to just pose the question to each of the panelists, what relevance do they actually see cultural diplomacy having now, given the historical development of the EU, where, officially speaking, culture actually wasn't so relevant in terms of really priority one, priority two, really being more economics and politics. And I wanted to just begin by quoting Walter Lacour. Many of you may know him. He's actually a famous terrorism expert based in the U.S. At the time when he said this quote, I think it was actually 2002, he was then the co-chair of the International Research Council at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., and he was trying to make reference to the current global situation. This is then in 2002, after September 11th, where the world was really trying to ask itself, how do we deal with this very difficult international situation with terrorism, security issues, etc.? And he poses an important point, I think, that is relevant also for the European context. He says, far from being on the verge of a new order, the world has entered a period of great disorder. In facing these new dangers, a re-examination of old priorities is needed. Cultural diplomacy, in the widest sense, has increased in importance, whereas traditional diplomacy and military power are of limited use in coping with most of these dangers. So I wanted to begin this panel by asking each of the panelists to maybe share their perspectives in the sense, do they see the same relevance for cultural diplomacy today? There would also be the opportunity, if you'd like to make a brief reference to the historical development of the EU. Did it have maybe a greater role before? Does it have a greater role now? I think that would be really fascinating for our participants. And I'm just thinking maybe we'll begin in gentleman's style, ladies first, if Ms. Uyttebroeck wouldn't mind. And then from there we can see who would like to interject, and we can have that as our first round of comments from the panel. Please, Ms. Uyttebroeck.
Thank you. Good morning or good day, everybody. Historically speaking, firstly, I would like to remark that the cultural convergence, or several forms of cultural convergence, which have existed on this continent since time immemorial, has not prevented a succession of conflicts and wars, and some of them rooted in religious annexed cultural differences, by the way. So to believe that cultural meetings, or the meeting of cultures, is in itself an antidote to conflict may be a little naive. So that's one remark I want to make. A second one is that when the European community started in the 50s, we already had, or were building, the Council of Europe, and you had the European Charter on the Protection of Fundamental Rights, and it was considered that culture in the broad sense of the word was more of a realm of the Council of Europe than of the community that was being built. The whole idea of the community being, in the beginning, to bring together exactly those industries which had fueled the war in the previous centuries and decades. So that was an important issue. In the beginning, culture and education were considered to be off limits for the European institutions. It's an important thing to take into account, because the member states considered that this really ought to remain issues of strictly national competence, and or to be discussed within the framework of the Council of Europe. And it is only via the draft direction on Télévision Sans Frontières that, to my memory and in my experience, culture, or part of it, namely the production of TV and the production of content for TV, became matters of concern for the European Union. And that was the period when Jacques Lang, then French Minister of Culture, in a United Nations conference in Mexico, if I'm not mistaken, pleaded for what he called l'exception culturelle, arguing that culture and cultural products should not be subjected to the same rules, or the same absence of rules, or should not be obliged to offer the same openness as other human productions. And you had a whole movement of mainly film directors and European film directors, film producers, arguing for a European directive on a prescribed percentage of time having to be devoted to national productions or to productions in the national language. And that came in very handy for Spain and Portugal, by the way, because that would have meant that, for instance, Brazilian series could be broadcasted on Portuguese television, and South American series in Spanish could be broadcast on Spanish television. And so it was a huge discussion, and it was amazing to see. I was not one of the main protagonists of it, but I was a member of this parliament at the time. It was interesting to see, by the way, how colleagues belonging to so-called Latin cultures, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Greeks were not as present in this debate, were much more worried about the future of their cultures and their languages than colleagues belonging to so-called smaller cultures and language, the Scandinavians, the Flemish in Belgium, as opposed to the French-speaking Belgians, in this case, the Dutch, etc. And finally, the outcome, if I remember correctly, was some halfway solution. And then as time evolved, education came within or came an issue on the radar, let's put it that way, of the European Union that was initiated by Tony Blair, who was then Prime Minister of the UK. And I couldn't help thinking that it came in handy for him to put on the table issues like the future of universities in Europe, which are important but which are not directly in the area of competence of the institutions of the Union. So these are a few remarks. Now, on diplomacy, the interesting thing is that right now we are busy building a European diplomacy in the traditional sense of the word. We had delegations of the Commission in most nations of the world, and those delegations of the Commission are presently being transformed in delegations of the European Union, that is, in actually embassies of the European Union, but some member states don't want them to be called embassies, because embassies should only be national. And they don't want the heads of delegation to be called ambassadors, because only representatives of member states should carry that title of ambassador. I find this slightly ridiculous, but what I want to point at is that we're busy building diplomacies in the traditional sense of the word. And you quoted a scholar just right now. I'm not sure that the time of traditional diplomacy in the sense of conflict prevention, conflict resolution by traditional diplomatic negotiation is over. I would say quite the contrary. I would say it's more important than ever before if we want to prevent conflicts. Does that exclude culture and cultural exchanges? Certainly not. Absolutely not. But proof demands that we realize that this is not now the priority of our diplomatic delegations, even if they will do what they can to help exchanges and realize how important it is and help with the variety of foreign affairs instruments which are at the disposition of the Union right now. It is not the absolute priority. Is that right? Is that wrong? That is up for discussion, I would say. So let me limit myself to those introductory remarks, remembering that culture, education, and whatever belonged to those at the origin were not meant to be matters of competence for the institutions of the Union. And it only came about gradually that the various council formations started to do work on that and started to devise regulations on that, be it that the regulations are still very, very cautious. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tarand, I'd be very happy to welcome your response and perspectives.
Thank you. Actually, I can't really respond. I can agree. But one tragic part of a culture in European Parliament is that you have to be simultaneously in many places. Unfortunately, my turn to go to another place came right now. So I would like to throw into the air just 2 points. I met a very experienced diplomat 2 years ago. His whole career has been in diplomacy, and he argued that culture is a total waste and least useful tool in his work, because you put a lot of energy and money, for instance, to bring over a theater or a music orchestra, and sometimes artists may be capricious and it's difficult to deal with them, and the benefit which you gain is actually not good, because the real power holders are not actually interested in culture. And I must admit that it was surprising to me in the beginning, but there must be some share of truth in it. So perhaps the ways traditional diplomacy uses the culture have become a little bit too formal or just to get it done way. So there is a sort of separation, which I don't think is useful. But obviously you can argue that the money you put into this kind of activity brings you less benefit than a nice lunch with some kind of deputy permanent undersecretary. But that brings me to another point, which I want to ask every citizen of Europe, not only the members of parliament, that I've been told that 1/3 of this of the budget of the European Parliament goes to translation, which is basically quite a huge amount of money. And I listened to Professor Lagrou also earlier, and he gave a very good description what is the situation with the different languages here in the continent. And my question is anybody ready to support my proposal, which I can make because I come from a very small country. We have only 1 million speakers of my language. We should stop using all the official languages in synchronized translation. Agree with the fact that some languages are bigger, some are smaller. I mean bigger in terms of numbers who speak them as a native language. We should say that French, German, English, Polish, and Spanish are the languages we translate, and every member should master at least one of those. And if he or she doesn't, obviously the other official languages can be translated, but provided he or she pays for it. So, on his salary, obviously. So that would be what I wanted to say, and I'm really desperately sorry that I cannot be. But I come back at 2 o'clock. I mean, we have to practice what we preach, and we preach here that more women should be on top jobs, and I'm going now to promote Diana Wallace's campaign to become the president of this parliament.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Tarand. We look forward to continuing with you this afternoon. No problem. No problem. I would suggest let's keep with maybe the members of European Parliament. Mr. Severin, if you wouldn't mind maybe offering your perspectives now, and then we can move more to civil society and culture. Mr. Severin, please.
Well, let me try. I will be very brief. My first remark is that the historical foundation of the European unity lies in its disunity. So this is our historical foundation. Conflicts, quarrels, if you want crusades, which give us the sense of a certain identity by confrontation with the others, about whom we don't know yet if they are Europeans or not. I believe that they are Europeans, but anyhow, the debate is going on. So our unity has its origin in our disunity. And when speak about predicting the future, which is much easier than predicting the past, of course, predicting the future, when predicting the future, we should know that the future is plural. There are futures, not only one future. And if the future of the yesterday Europe is it's today's present, this is not because in our genes it was already decided that we are going to unite, but because I would say by chance we followed a very, very complicated way which led us where we are today, and today we do not know if tomorrow we will remain united or not. And this is literally so because this very week, tomorrow and after tomorrow, we are going to have a very, very decisive and important European Council. And I do hope, my conviction is that the European unity will survive, but nobody could be sure of that. So therefore I say our disunity led us here, and we have to learn from this disunity. So we were not deemed to become united. We are not sure that we'll stay united, but we have to do everything we can in order to remain united. Of course, these confrontations, controversies, crises, and so on, had at their origin perhaps more the geopolitical, geostrategic, geo-economic interest rather than the cultural diversity. But I think that the cultural diversity made, to a certain extent, more difficult for us at a certain point of our history to find solutions in order to overcome our geopolitical and geo-economic controversies. So therefore I believe that if we promote the cultural diplomacy or the cultural dimension of the diplomacy, because I think that it's rather a cultural dimension of the diplomacy, we could make it easier, more secure, more smooth, the way towards solutions to controversies or towards avoiding controversies. And from this point of view, I just want to draw your attention on a very interesting concept, which is a democratic security. I was quite surprised to see that many do not know this concept. I thought that everybody knows the concept. But to remind you what is it about, democratic security speaks for the idea, for the conviction, for the fact that those countries, those peoples, those nations which organize themselves on the basis of similar values, namely the values of democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, do not make war to each other. So this doesn't mean that they don't have interests which are different, but they can find ways to solve these different interests, the problem of different interests, in a peaceful way. So a certain, I won't say cultural identity, but cultural compatibility, cultural convergency makes it possible for us to avoid the wars. And when we speak about that kind of culture, which is at the foundation of the democratic way of living, the democratic mentalities, this is characteristic for the European Union. And my last point, the cultural specificity might determine the specificity of the solutions necessary for the definition and promotion of the non-cultural interest. There are non-cultural interests, of course, economic interest, social interest, political interest, strategic interest, but the way in which we define that interest is influenced by our cultural characteristics. And the way in which we might define solution to the problems linked to those non-cultural interests is also influenced, to my mind, by our mentalities circumscribed by our cultures. And if this is the case, it's important to develop a cultural diplomacy, because by that cultural diplomacy we could make ourselves aware of our cultural specificities, and as I had the opportunity to say yesterday, we could be more respectful towards each other in cultural terms, and also find the solutions which match with our cultural cultural thoughts, with cultural characteristics, and which could indeed allow us to live together. From that point of view, I think that we have, in a certain way, we have developed a certain European culture, which is not homogeneous, however, but which brings together in an effort of convergency the different cultures of our peoples. And of course, I think that this is an effort which is worthwhile to be made at the global level in order to build peace and cultural coexistence at the global level. I will stop here with these remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Severin. And now ask Mr. Wielemans if you could also share your perspectives with us.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
No, the only thing I wanted to say, I'm actually a film director, so I'm not into politics, I would say, or indirectly. The only thing I would say is about the culture is a way for a larger audience to understand difficult issues which are discussed around here, for example. And I think it's very important that most of the people understand what important decisions are. And also, culture permits you to offer a new perspective, new angles for new decisions or new utopia, I would say. And this is very important for everyone to sometimes go out of the reality and find other solutions which are not especially realistic, but which in fact open new windows, simply. And although I think culture is not an end, it's just a debate, it's just an opening, and people like politicians could start the debate after the cultural project. It's just not an end, it's just an opening way to continue the debate. I also wanted to speak about television. So as a filmmaker, I've been broadcasting some stuff on television and on cinema, and the main problem is that it's only broadcast at one time, and I think nowadays we should take care of more and more about internet, because it makes every program, every project more available because of the time. You can go whenever you want and check what's happening, and also it permits you to share ideas with people from other countries, other cultures, and that's why I think internet should be really taken care of, I would say. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's about it. It's just a simple thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd maybe ask Dr. Foreman. You haven't had a chance yet, and then we'll conclude the perspectives with Professor. Please.
Yes, thank you. I'm a researcher and practitioner on procedures of organizational development and political change management. And out of this perspective, I have to work quite a lot with culture. And why? Because in organizational theory, organizations don't just have a culture, they are a culture. Meaning that culture is what in the end makes an organization. It's a specific way of perceiving the world and of finding its own role in the world. And it's very interesting that if you want to change, or if you want to unify, for example, different nations, you can only do this through culture. And every organization at the end has like a genetic code, a code like DNS, which is introduced in the process of founding this. So it's very interesting to look to the process of the unification of the European Union, and you will see that the founding fathers, especially de Gasperi, Schuman and Adenauer, when they founded or developed the idea of a European Union, they have a common cultural basis, and this common basics is the middle empire of the former Franconian Empire. When the big Franconian Empire after Charlemagne was divided, it was divided into three parts. The western part, which later became France, the eastern part, which became Germany, and the middle part, Burgundy, which went here from the Benelux states until the north of Italy. And Schuman, Adenauer, and de Gasperi came of this area, and they had another commonality. In this middle part of the former Franconian Empire, they had a specific understanding of Catholicism. All three were Catholic, but it is an understanding of a very social, engaged, liberal, you can say, enlightened form of Catholicism. So they had like a role model. And the role model, in terms of sense, the genetic code which they introduced into the European Union, was like a secular organizational form of the Catholic Church out of their perceiving of how a good organization should work. So it's interesting because, for example, I'm Protestant, I'm Lutheran, I'm much too sectarian and much too skeptic to mega organizations. So I find it interesting if you start looking to the certain sense genetic codes of different cultures here in Europe, that they have a different understanding of a role of, for example, states. And it's very interesting also with the widening of the European Union also to Eastern and Middle European countries with more like an Orthodox tradition and some part also Muslim tradition. All this have different roots, different cultures, which is very stronger still rooted in their own patrimony and their own religious patrimony of how an unifying process as statehood should work. That's one side, that's the political side. The other side is the European Union also has an economical, from the beginning was also an economical process. And that's very interesting because there is this famous theory about the Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism. And it says that what we today understand as capitalism was in a certain sense a very Protestantic way of making business through a very high degree of pressure on being productive. So why I'm saying this? Because it's interesting that if we want to go further in the process of unification, so this is a change management process, you can't change an organization against its DNS. You have to work with its DNS. So only if you understand the cultural basics, and I understand cultural diplomacy very much as a process of working with the different cultural basics, you can understand it. Second, there's another, I think, very interesting part of the cultural foundations, and it's the one of the democratic culture. Jürgen Habermas, a social philosopher, he worked out that in the 18th century there was like a revolution in the way of how public debate was done, because before there was almost any public debate. The church and the feudalistic system was so strong, but in the 18th century, first in small clubs which were private, people started to deliberate. They developed their own arguments, and this was the precondition of what later became, for example, the French Revolution. So it's interesting then to think what are the formats, what are the rooms where culture can be experienced, where democratic culture can be experienced. Why? Because culture can't be changed through papers and rules. Culture is developed through experiences. So if you make good experiences with a specific way of behaving, you will start to adapt this culture. If you make negative experiences with a specific culture, you will also adapt this negative way. So if you have a corrupt country with a time, you will. So if you have corrupt structures with the time, also you will get like a corrupt culture in the society. So it's very. If you want to change organizations, for example, which have a very dysfunctional culture, you have to start with procedures. You have to found rooms, small experience rooms, where people experience this new way of culture. And the reason why, for example, now here in the European Parliament is not because of this nice conference, but because I'm working here together with some members of Parliament, and we are developing a new kind of tool which closes the gap between the European Parliament and the civil society in the 27 countries. It's called house parliaments. The idea is very simple, that parliamentarians, when they have very difficult, very disputed decisions to make, ask ordinary people, and they send them some information about pro and contras of this dispute, of this decision. And this ordinary people, a little bit like this what Habermas describes in the Strukturwandel of Öffentlichkeit, meaning these small clubs, they invite other friends and colleagues, sit together in the house and debate about this decision, make a decision, and send this via email back to the members of parliament. What is the idea? The idea first is to have like a competency between different ways of, in such a sense, making public deliberation, not only through lobbies and parties, but also this direct way of public participation. The second is that, and that's the vision. The vision behind is that in maybe 10 or 15 years, we will have thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of these house parliaments all over Europe, that this will become like a movement. And what is happening in this house parliament when they meet maybe 5-6 times a year, in these 2 hours, 3 hours when they sit together, they're not just only discussing about a specific issue, but they are starting to think more and more European. And this will have a cultural impact. Why? Because they will start to have a positive experience with Europe. They will get on the emotional basics. They will have another understanding of what unifying Europe means. This is only one example. So I'm also speaker of a research and development cluster where we develop this kind of tools. Why? Because I have a vision, in a certain sense, what is the future of the European Union. I think the European Union can be like an innovator pool, like a tool maker for these new kinds of political and social innovations. We have thousands of them. And the idea on this political and social innovations is that through this we can empower people much better to take a more responsible role in politics and economy and civil society. And I think that's my last statement. You never can change any culture. You never can foster a process of unifying anything if you don't have a vision where you want to go. So it's not enough to have roots. I was at the beginning speaking on this Christian rules of Europe. But the more important thing, if you want to change, is that you have to have this common vision. And I think it's very interesting. And this vision must be much more than Europe. It must be the role of Europe in the world. And I think that the experiences with Europe is all doing at the moment with this very hard struggle is a big chance because it's a big learning opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Dr. Lagrou, please.
I have talked for far too long, so I'll be short. I always get very nervous when I hear somebody mentioning genetic codes, and especially genetic codes of culture. Show me your genetic codes and I will tell you who you are, please. Well, what about historical foundations? Just two observations. Historical foundations and cultural diplomacy. As a historian, of course, I should be delighted that people think historical foundations are important for the European Union. Please hire plenty of historians. We will write you historical foundations, and we'll all be happy with this. What I tried to argue this morning is that, well, what we are now doing with the European Union is not simply a repetition of nation building on a superior level. And if we are in the European Union just in a nation building process, we need a common language, we need a common history, and we will desperately try to find a common identity. I simply think we are doing something else. And I also think, just thinking on this failed constitutional treaty, maybe all the waste of time of discussing on the preamble of this constitutional treaty, well, it was a waste of time and it went nowhere. Do we need a preamble? We don't. Do we need a common identity? We don't. I think the European project is not about nation building. It's not about inventing noble origins, our European ancestors, like there were Belgian and French and whichever ancestors. No, we don't need common ancestors. We don't need identity. We don't need a common past. We need a common future. We need to think about what we want to do together. We need to write a new social contract because the national social contracts that are leading us are simply dysfunctional. And I think we see this today in the economic realm every day, but we can multiply the examples. So I very much agree with my neighbor. So historical foundations, please, let's forget about it. I'm a historian, but I think history is also about emancipating from the past and saying we are doing something different. We are not in the 19th century, and instead of creating a German nation, we are creating a European nation. If we are lacking imagination to this point, well, we can only face failure. Our future, our present is new. We are doing something differently, and please, we do not need historical foundations. Second point, cultural diplomacy. Well, it is maybe the word diplomacy that bothers me a little bit. Diplomacy is a tool of the state, and it is precisely this marriage, this confiscation of language, what I told this morning, and of culture by national states that is something of the past. It's the matter of ownership. What business do states have promoting culture if culture is not national? And I think in Europe today, culture is ever less national. And if you go back in time, it was not national either. The question of ownership should lead us to disconnect culture from state, and thus maybe have new definitions of what diplomacy is. It is certainly not something of ambassadors and states trying to promote national culture. When I am thinking about the European Union, I often think of Franz Kafka. Why would that be? Now, I think that Kafka is indeed a very good example of, well, one protagonist of European culture. What could we do? What could any national state have done with Franz Kafka when he was writing his great novels? Here was a Czechoslovak citizen with parents who were speaking Czech and German, but who chose to write in German, which was, of course, an embarrassment to the Czechoslovak national state. But just imagine that the German state would have taken him as an example of German culture. Well, that would have been probably traumatic for him. So, well, maybe Franz Kafka is not a figure of the past, but a figure of the future, where culture, language, creation are not national. And that is probably what the European construction is all about.
Thank you very much. I think you inspired a brief response from Mr. Severin, and then we'll take some questions and comments.
No, just I think that we still have, should I say, a controversy, or at least we have to note two approaches in Europe. I would call it the folkish romanticism and the Enlightenment rationalism. Are we the product of our ancestors? And then we could speak about the cultural genes in us, or are we driven by the present status, which is a real one, and by the aspirations which could start from this status? And I simply want to say, and I stop here, I don't want to elaborate much, that those who have the best possible instinct for building the European Union are those who think that the criteria for cohesion within the European Union are our aspiration for the future. Because the past divides us a lot. If the memory is at the foundation of the European Union, we are in a big trouble, because in our memory there are a lot of episodes of hatred and a lot of reasons for disagreement. But not memory should driven us in building the European Union, but imagination. And imagination is not about the past. If we try to imagine the past, it means that we don't write history but mythology, and this is even more dangerous. But imagination should speak about the future. Let's imagine a common future which has the origin in a very divided past. So how could we in any case match these two visions on us, the nation as an organic body and the nation as a group of citizens, of individuals having a common future, or at least a common perspective for the future? This is indeed one of the challenges of the European Union, and from this point of view, I don't know diplomacy or not, but the cultural approach is extremely important. Thank you. Just echoing.
Thank you very much. You've inspired a few other reactions from the panel, but I do want to give the floor right now to you, because technically we're out of time. It's now 12:30. So I think what I will suggest is we have this rule at ICD, sometimes we'll enlist in times like these, the 30-second rule, that we will give you a chance in 30 seconds to pose your question or make your comment. Let's try to hear as many voices as we can, and then we can come back to the panel and give you a chance briefly to give maybe a reaction or a comment to then conclude the panel. We do have to reconvene again at 1:30, so we're now going into your lunchtime. So I'm on the one hand respectful of that, but I do want to give you at least a chance to express also some of your questions and your views. So I see a hand already in the back. Let's maybe begin in the back.
Yeah, my name is Kassem Barghouti from Palestine. And my first question is, I think foreign policies should be made according and based on interests and benefits to countries. So can we say that the EU countries don't have common benefits and interests? Because if let's take an example, the Palestinian state to go to the UN to ask for recognition. We have so many different situations, so many different opinions inside the European countries themselves. We didn't see one position and one opinion inside the European Union. And my second question is, now, after the Arab Spring, we can notice and see that the Islamic Brotherhood is winning all the elections in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt. Do you think that the cultural diplomacy can help now to build a new relationship with the new political party that will rule the Arab countries? And this question, I think the parliament members can answer me in this.
I'm Annika. I'm a European Studies student in Maastricht University, and I have a question mostly directed to members of parliament, maybe. Mrs. Uyttebroeck, you said that cultural diplomacy is not the first priority, and I fully agree with that, but do you think when the European Union is directing towards something like the United States of Europe or similar to that, that maybe at some point the different cultural attitudes towards political adaptation over the whole EU might bring up some problems, and do you maybe have an idea how to solve those?
Okay, thank you.
Abigail Sandberg from the U.S. And so my question is, goes a lot on what the professor said this morning, and also I'm interested in perhaps the filmmaker's point of view. How does, in the cultural context, when you're bringing all these other countries together with independent languages and independent cultures, what happens when there's a fairly dominant third-party culture coming in terms of entertainment, in terms of language? I mean, specifically, if you turn on, I live here in Brussels, if you turn on the television, most days you can watch just about any American television show. You can watch American movies anywhere, and throughout the city you can speak English just about anywhere, which of course there's English influence as well as the American. But when you're looking at kind of bringing all these other independent European cultures together, where is there a place? Is it disruptive that there's third-party influences, be it the US or some other cultures, or does that in many ways help to bring those cultures together?
Okay, thank you very much. Here, please.
Alina Chan, Mexican-American. I work for the Food Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome. Just a quick comment and a quick question. I do understand the concern whenever we talk about and we raise the issue of genetical codes and the culture. I do understand that, you know, if it's not properly taken care of, it could be misused and misunderstood. But I wonder if it could actually, if used carefully, be a tool and would actually help to understand if perhaps, you know, if we study more deeply and we understand, it could help us to understand each other better and to see if there are actual any differences, but not to take it in a, you know, in a inappropriate context, but to be used to perhaps try to understand each other better and then, you know, help us to live better and communicate and work, you know, better. And on a basis of understanding of a different culture, and if there are any differences, how to be able to cope with the differences and integrate each other as a human race.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there a final question or comment? Here in the front, please.
My name is Ilir Dugolli, and I come from cultural diplomacy from Kosovo. I want to ask a global question, and How far can cultural diplomacy go, considering that its first instrument is to play with arts of attraction and soft power? And how is to define cultural diplomacy, knowing that there are more stereotypes than facts or information? Thank you.
So maybe let's begin, Mr. Severin. There were a number of questions for the members of parliament, so we can just go from left to right for the concluding remarks and also reactions to the questions or the comments. Please.
I will answer only some of the questions. And I would address the question concerning the new challenges coming up from the developments in the Arab states in the South Mediterranean shore and the various Islamic parties' success. I think that from the European Union point of view, I speak for our need to take a country being so successful in the secular Islamic development as Turkey on board. From years already I thought and I said and I wrote that Turkey would be extremely important for European Union, if European Union wants really to be a global player, and I think it needs to be a global player because also the world needs a global player like the European Union. And at the same time, with Turkey on board, with Turkey within the European Union, we could really have a very, very important, effective tool to address in a secular way to the Islamic countries. So I don't want to elaborate more on that. I think this should be an important consequence of these developments in our southern neighborhood. And this should indeed make us revisit some of our prejudices concerning the membership of Turkey. And also we should be afraid within this context about the neo-Ottomanism which might emerge in Turkey, and we should, by dealing in an appropriate way with Turkey, to avoid also this kind of development. Okay. Now the emergence of some other cultures in the European Union. From this point of view, even I'm coming from a Latin country, I'm not afraid to lose my identity. And I think that many great peoples in the world are completely vanished, disappeared. So, and the world is going on. I am for the free competition of culture. Not in economic terms, but in purely cultural terms. I think that we could develop a splendid culture. I think that if we look only on the music side and on the painting side, Europe is unequal till today. And indeed our contribution to the world culture is fantastic from this point of view at least. So I'm not afraid to compete with the American culture here. So this is my short answer to this thing. I didn't understand exactly the Kosovo lady question. But maybe you will. There are some others who understood it, and you will. And certainly there is a kind of genetic, if you want, a gene, but not a gene in the biological sense. We transmit from one generation to another generation through education, certain mentalities. Of course, from this point of view, there is, how should I say, a transmission. But it is also, it depends very much if there is a liberal society or a more authoritarian society. I'm not speaking in political terms, but in let's say, educational terms. A more authoritarian society could change faster because it's hierarchical. A more liberal, slower. But anyhow, there are changes, and there is a variability which is completely different as the variability in the biological field when we speak about genetics. Completely different.
Very briefly, because again, I totally agree with my left neighbor. Why is there something wrong with an obsession with identity? First, because the project to find what unites all Europeans is doomed to failure. But then also, if you are talking about the common identity, it means what does separate us from the others? What is very European that would then not be American and that would separate us from our neighbors in the Arab and Muslim world, that is also doomed to failure, because of course, in a way, American culture and Islamic culture are totally part of what Europe is all about. And we should safeguard, protect ourselves, or steer clear of European provincialism, saying we are transcending nationalism and we are becoming Europeans, and then maybe become even more xenophobe in many ways than what nationalism was before. So let's stop talking about identities. There is no clear cultural break when crossing the Atlantic or when crossing the Mediterranean. There are only continuities, and only happily so. I don't like identity also because, well, I think there's only identification and no identity. We can change in the course of a lifespan. It's not because we are born as an American Mexican or because we are born as a Belgian Flemish that we cannot end up doing very different things and have different identifications. Maybe if I live long enough in Italy, I will feel Italian, and I live now in Brussels and I feel ever less Flemish in many ways. So my identity changes, and please allow me to change as many times as I can. And please allow all Europeans to change their identities as often as they can. And the more they change, the better things will run in Europe.
I entirely agree with what you said on identity. Is absolutely right. To a degree, it's a totally senseless question because the answer is now of necessity a limitation, and therefore it's no good. I do, however, but that's another debate, think that history is extremely important, and whether we like it or not, it's always coming back, and if we try to ignore it, it comes back with a vengeance. And I tell this to my colleague Severin, I've been in search for several years for a history book that would enable me to better understand the common history of Southeastern Europe and the Balkans, and then I was told time and again it doesn't exist. Only what you have is different history books from the different perspectives, but not an embracing one. So maybe it still needs to be written. But that's an aside. The question by the Palestinian gentleman is of course very important, and you understand it. It's not possible to go into a debate on the whole Middle East issue right now, because that would keep us maybe for several days. Yes, member states have different attitudes, and you know this, and I suppose that the Palestinian Authority knows this just as well as we all do. So a more common approach is gradually developing, but we can't say that we have yet arrived at one single approach on this issue. That is not true. You asked a question about Islam, what attitude to adopt vis-à-vis Islamist parties in various Arab countries. I think that first of all we should distinguish between the parties and not put them all in the same basket. It would be a mistake. I don't think that the Moroccan PJD, for instance, is exactly the same as the Egyptian Muslim Brothers. They're not, and the Muslim Brothers are not the same as the Salafists. And we should be careful to make those distinctions, and we should be careful in clearly delimiting what we regard as fundamental. No discrimination, a lay state, etc. So and engage with them. I mean, we should stop reproaching the people to vote the way they did. We wanted free elections. We had fairly free elections, and now we have to accept the result, whether we like it or not. And that, in my view, also reflects back to what happened in Palestine in 2006. What about the impact of heavyweight American film and television broadcasts? I would say that the worst is over. There used to be a time when this was presented as the big threat to European, yes, but the film industry in a very broad sense of the word. And I believe that the film industry has demonstrated that it is able to develop and still flourish. I watched on Arte a few nights ago the Gala of European Film Industry, which was very interesting, by the way, because the two countries, if I may say that, who went away with the most prizes were respectively Denmark with 3 or 4 and Belgium with 2. I mean, directors and actors and script writers from those countries. And the director is a Danish lady director, by the way. And so things are going well. And how to cope with cultural differences? Well, a certain sensitivity to what is important for other people helps, of course, with negotiations, etc. But one should not exaggerate those. I strongly believe that we, as human beings, have more in common than there are elements that differentiate us. And I've always found it very strange that we were told that we need to be aware of the fact that Chinese people hate to lose face. Now, do you know any people who likes to lose face? I mean, I don't. Nobody likes to lose face. That's just one example, and you can have many ones. A certain gift for empathy in general is very useful, and attentiveness to details. But we should be aware that we have much more in common, and that also applies back to past generations, than there are elements which differentiate us. If that was not the case, how could we still understand the emotions of a novel, a character in a novel written in the 11th century in Japan? We can, in the tale of Genji. And I could give many other examples. So please, let's celebrate that, and let's be aware of that. Let's also celebrate the differences, but let's not consider them as insurmountable hurdles, because I don't believe they are insurmountable. Thank you.
First, this picture of genetic code is surely only a metaphor. But I think it's important because culture is every time based in the past. It is through our education. It's very interesting that the room where we adapt our basic culture, which in big degree doesn't change for a big part of our life, is based in family and in neighborhood. So what I was referring is that we really want to get this process of unification, not only from a governmental level, but also as a public, civil society project. We must bring and to a certain extent transfer the process of unification into the living room, into the kitchen table, and not only on a passive way through media, through consuming. Culture values are learned by doing. So this was the idea, or that is the idea, for example, with this kind of house parliament. Second, it's a question of from the person of Palestine. I also will use a metaphor there, because we have a similar problem in cosmology. If we try to understand what holds a galaxy like the Milky Way together, we have a big problem, because if we only bring together, in certain sense, add the visible mass, we don't have enough gravitational force. That's the reason why scientists started to speak about what is called dark or invisible energy and mass. And that's the same. If we want to understand what holds a pluralistic bunch of cultures, of identities, of nations together, like the supranational project of Europe, it's not just the visible energy in this metaphor, meaning benefits, interests. This is only one part. We have this, many people speak then from soft values. We have this invisible, very untangible. You cannot grasp really culture. But like I told, I work quite a lot in organizational development projects, especially for the public services, small and medium-sized communities, but also for ministries, European Union, and so on. And it's every time, it's a central question. What is really the purpose, the aim behind of it? What are the feelings, the emotional, Tonspur? When you make a movie, you need the emotional track. And I think it's very important to think, what is the emotional track of this process of unification? What is the emotional track of, for example, what we perceive today when we read in the newspaper or see in the TV all this crisis debate? I think it's very important, and cultural diplomacy is in getting an emotional track into a process which is positive, where people, in a certain sense, start to feel Europe, start to love Europe.
Thank you. Mr. Bello, please.
I just wanted to come to your point concerning the third world. I don't think projects coming from the third world are less interesting. The only thing is that there's a problem of distribution and communication. How do you communicate your project? You've got a great idea, but it's impossible to cross borders or to come in the big audience. And I mean, if you look at the American cinema, they put probably 1/3 of their budget into communication. And nowadays, I was discussing the other day with a friend who's a filmmaker in Belgium, and he has to decide to launch his movie between Steven Spielberg and Soderbergh. And so he's just like, yeah, probably I would stay 4 days in the cinema in my country, in Belgium. So what can you do in front of that? It's just trying to find alternatives of distributing your work. And I'm coming back to the internet. You know, it's for me, it's like the only solution of bringing your work when I speak about medias, film and photography. But also, I think the internet gives you the possibility to form new groups, new sort of tribes in a way. You know, you can make form, like destroy the borders and make region thoughts or groups, and I think that's the direction where we should try to go. And there's also the point of facilities, and like people in the third world, they don't have the possibility to have the same material, so it seems that they don't do good work, which is stupid. I mean, but that's how the public work. So we should put more advantage in bringing schools and materials that they can use. And also there's a big issue about translations, I think. If you go, I was in Morocco 2 weeks ago, and the young generation, they don't follow the mainstream medias anymore, and they go on the internet and they share. You've got blogs, and most of the people, they go on blogs and discuss lots of interesting issues. But the problem is that everything is in Arabic, so nobody here, like here in Europe, it's going to be difficult to understand what they're talking about. So we should maybe put more facilities to make those comments available for everyone around the world. So yeah, that's my position.
Excellent. All right, well, no, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the panel. I thought it was a very thought-provoking discussion. Certainly, we did not answer these questions or even some of the questions that I posed in depth, but I think we did partially answer them. And I think through the diversity of perspectives, we're coming closer to our overall understanding of the relevance of cultural diplomacy in the European context. So I would suggest that we conclude the panel discussion now. The themes that we were discussing in this panel, of course, will be relevant themes throughout the rest of today and the following few days. But I'd like to maybe take this opportunity to ask you to please assist me in expressing our gratitude to the panelists. Well, thank you very much.